I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for another BDSM United podcast in our Kink Ethics 101 series. We've been looking at history, the history of ethics, to try to help inform us how we should or how we could incorporate ethics into our kinky play and into our BDSM relationships and into how we form our local communities and how we influence our culture as a whole. Because when adults are educated, it makes everything in our community better. People act better. Hopefully, they do better. And that's really important. That's what we're looking at today. We want to be able to use our intellect and our reasoning in order to influence how we do things and how we act and what things we view in our culture as acceptable and good and right, uh, perhaps even virtuous. So, in looking at history, five major philosophical and ethical schools sprung up in the Western world after this golden age of Athens, after Socrates and Plato and Aristotle established their academic and philosophical traditions. They really formed the foundation. And then in response to that, there were five different major movements. Uh, we want to look at a couple of those, and we'll look at all five over the next few podcast episodes. Um, the Instead of focusing on uh, governance and political theory as the philosophical pillars of the Golden Age had done, adherence to these new branches focused on the life of the individual and personal ethical applications and approaches. So, let me first define what these five groups are. And I want to say that we recently purchased a book on ethics, an ethical 101 book to kind of help guide us and, create this outline, kind of uh, show us a lot of these principles. Because while I studied ethics in university as part of my personal degree, I needed a little bit of help on taking it, taking what I had learned there and organizing it into something that we could then apply to kink and BDSM. So I will put a link to that book. It's called Ethics 101 and the author's name is Brian Boone. It's a really good book. It's been really useful in creating this series and influencing this series. And I'll put a link in the description. You can find it in the first couple episodes of this series as well. But it's a good time to re-mention it again, to be ethical and cite our sources. So these five groups were the Cynics. And the Cynics believed that the one true purpose in life was to seek out and experience happiness. I think I kind of like those guys. The Skeptics thought that there were no moral certainties, and with it, an imperative to doubt everything. Definitely know some cynics in my life. The Epicureans believed pleasure to be life's highest pursuit. Oh, yeah. But even as the sect advocated pleasure seeking, it warned against pursuing pleasures that could also cause harm to the self and others. That's good. I'm glad they put a little bit of safety checks in place for themselves. The Stoics believed that nature was innately rational and that humans were unable to change that powerful force. Morally, they believed that happiness could come by accepting this as truth, and so they endeavored to change their own behaviors so as to fall more in line with this idea. And then the Neoplatonists uh, were in the group that was an expansion of an application of Platonic ideals, but with more religious based theological teachers, and then also some Eastern mysticism. So let's look at some of these groups. We're going to look first at the Cynics. One thing that the great philosophers of ancient Egypt spent a preponderance of time on was applying the individual concepts of philosophy and ethics to political and public life. That was how important that politics were to Greek people in this time in history. Public life was all important, and philosophy had to find a way to fit into this idea. For some of us, politics is still our most important thing. It's all we talk about. It's all we post about on social media. It's all we watch, watching politics on the news. So for some of us, we bring our politics into everything, or we view everything through the filter of politics. I know when I was into religion, I would do the same thing with religion. I would filter everything through my religious beliefs, but then I would put my religious beliefs into everything, and then I would also bring everything into my religious beliefs. I had a comment or commentary on everything that was going on in the world. Oftentimes I would share that, and I would come off as quite an asshole. And so, without that fitting in, philosophy wouldn't have been taken seriously, much less it wouldn't have thrived. And philosophy was a tool that citizens and rulers alike could use to better understand themselves and other humans, and to exploit both for personal gain or to progress society at its highest levels. In the Hellenistic era, chief among the changes in philosophy was a shift from political and public applications towards a more personal nature and how man should behave in his private, non political life. Distinct ethical schools of thought emerged, and these schools helped lay the groundwork for divergent ethical theories that would develop over the next several hundred years. Perhaps the least subtle and among the most radical of these viewpoints was the philosophy of the Cynics. These Cynics were a philosophical movement that believed that one true purpose in life, the one true purpose in life was to seek out and achieve happiness. This was to be done by looking to nature for certain virtues that would increase that likelihood and following them as nature would dictate. The term cynic is, of course, related to the word cynical, which today tends to mean a negative, distrusting disposition. This definition somewhat ties into cynics, and that cynics were cynical of any sort of man made system of ethics or morality. As a result, they preferred to go it the old way, to look to nature. So, cynicism was all about denying the philosophical and ethical conventions that had been established by the mainstream thinkers, because to them they were false, and following what came naturally instead. Cynics wanted to condemn traditional values that had falsely become virtues, such as wealth, reputation, pleasure, property, and family obligation. They endorsed shocking speech and action as a powerful counterpoint to those values of common decency. If we look into religious history, we look to the 1960s, we can see Anton LaVey rise up in the 1960s he was definitely along the lines of the Cynics because he expressed a definite cynicism to the virtues of Christianity and endorsed a lot of shocking speech, a lot of shocking action, merely as powerful counterpoints to the values that people in the world at that time viewed as common decency. He had black masses instead of regular masses, and he incorporated nudity into his church services, and he named his church the Church of Satan, as in to shock people. But he was largely an atheist, didn't really value or believe in religion. Some of his followers did. They were theists, and they went on to form other churches and other groups, splintering off of that original Church of Satan and creating things like the Temple of Set, which is an excellent organization these days that pursues relationship with the Seti, the gods, the Egyptian god Set, and then others that have more goetic kinds of religious beliefs and deal with spirits that are more goetic or dark, shadowy kind of left-hand path sort of spirituality. And so he just came to mind as a religious or a more modern day example of this principle. And so these, an early leader of the Cynics was Antithines. I'm going to go with that. Probably butchering his name too, because I don't speak Greek. So it's Antisthenes. He was born into a wealthy family that was so prominent, he was able to be a student of Socrates. While Plato carried on Socrates' teaching and his dialectic method, Antisthenes, I'm doing a terrible job. My apologies. Liked how Plato taught the art of enduring and of being indifferent to external factors so as to create an independent way of living. This guy taught that there were two kinds of objects: the external, such as personal property, and the internal, which comprises truth, knowledge, and the soul. So therefore, compartmentalizing, which was the fashion of those days, separating and compartmentalizing. He discouraged taking pleasure in any kind of external good or pleasure that wasn't the direct result of virtue, and encouraged actively taking on things like discomfort, such as physical pain, to accompany and motivate the soul in its drive to become wealthy in those inner objects or those inner virtues. And his writings have not survived, but some of his defiant sayings have lasted through the centuries, such as, "I would rather go mad than feel pleasure." His most devoted followers took to living a life of extreme austerity to avoid any sort of temptation by the hollow pursuits of men. They lived on the street, they dressed in rags, and they harassed passerby with their moral choices. Excuse me. My voice is getting a little scratchy today. I'm sipping on some ginger ale as we speak. So, one of this guy's most important students lived out the theories to the extreme. He lived as a beggar. He walked the streets in a barrel, criticizing passersby of their shallow lives and their adherence to arbitrary social conventions that he believed robbed them of their freedom to live according to the principles of nature. Not sure that any of us want to follow the example of the Cynics in that way. None of us are really wanting to take a vow of poverty. That's just, I don't think that's what any of us are looking at or looking toward. But some people view poverty as a badge of honor. Some people value the pursuit or, discredit the pursuit of employment and wealth and investment and those types of things. I wouldn't say that I'm one of those people. I don't value poverty. Poverty has never been a good thing in my life. I've lived in times of poverty and in brief times of homelessness, and just in my years of growing up and trying to make a way for myself. And those were not positive. They were positive in that I learned lessons throughout them. I learned to endure. I learned to be grateful for the things that I have, and I learned to work hard to gain the types of things that I wanted to have, like having a podcast. And I worked hard to study concepts like ethics so that I would have material to bring to the table, that there would be things about me that I would be able to bring to a relationship, positive things to bring to a relationship, not just bringing a dick. I'm more than just a dick and balls. I'm more than just muscles and somebody who can swing a flogger or swing a whip. I wanted there to be a depth to me, something that I can bring into a relationship to be a benefit to the relationship and to grow the relationship, not just to exist together with another person, but to have goals and create and accomplish things that was important to us. Those were things that I personally view as virtuous. So I wouldn't look to poverty to try to inform or, be a good goal or necessarily be virtuous. But, if you're the extreme cynic, perhaps that would be for you. I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for this BDSM United podcast. You can find the past episodes in this series at bdsmunited.com. You can find our kinky, uncensored social space that we created at mastersaturn.com. And it was a joy speaking with you today, and I'll talk with you again soon.